We have a special guest joining us. He has been called the Nostradamus of US presidential elections. Allan Lichtman, who is a history professor, has been teaching at the American University in Washington for half a century and has correctly predicted the result of 9 of the past 10, and even the one that got away in 2000, he insists, was stolen from Al Gore. But now he is gearing up for perhaps his greatest challenge: Joe Biden versus Donald Trump, second time. He developed his now famous 13 keys to the White House, a method for predicting presidential election results that every 4 years tantalizes the media, intrigues political operatives, and provokes sniping from pollsters as well. Mr. Lichtman says the 2024 race is too early to call, but that a lot would have to go wrong for one candidate to lose. He joins us on the World 24/7. Thank you for making time for us, Mr. Lichtman. The burning political question: who do you think has the edge in the 2024 US presidential elections? The polls don't look great for Joe Biden as we speak.
I haven't made a final prediction yet, but I do have a model, the 13 keys to the White House, which have been correct since 1984, 10 elections in a row. And the way it works is if 6 or more of the 13 keys go against the White House party, they are predicted losers. Fewer than 6, they are predicted winners. And right now, a lot would have to go wrong for Joe Biden to lose this election. He is at the moment down only 2 keys, and there are 4 keys that are shaky: third party, social unrest, and foreign policy success and failure. All 4 of those keys would have to fall against the White House party to predict their defeat.
So what are the 2 keys that have already fallen for Joe Biden?
It's based on my system, not on the polls. My system taps into the underlying structure of elections, which are votes up or down on the strength and performance of the White House party. And the reasons that I think Biden has the edge, although I've made no final prediction, is as the incumbent president, he automatically wins 2 of my keys: incumbency and party contest, because he's not contested for the nomination. That means 6 keys would have to fall to predict his defeat. If he didn't run, as some pundits have argued incorrectly, it would be a much more dire situation for the Democrats. They would lose 2 keys off the top: incumbency and contest. That would mean only 4 more keys would have to fall to predict their defeat.
So you think Joe Biden is still the man to beat in 2024, but does Biden have an advantage despite many polls that show him trailing Donald Trump?
Let me comment on the polls. Early polls have 0 predictive value. And moreover, polls are not predictors at all. They are momentary snapshots. You know, they say, if the election were held today, this is where the candidates stand. But the election isn't held today. So polls are not of any value for prediction. And early polls often lead you astray, as we saw in 2016 when I predicted Donald Trump's victory contrary to the polls, or in 1988 when George H.W. Bush, as late as May and June of the election year, was 17 points behind his opponent Mike Dukakis and went on to win handily, almost a 25-point swing. That's why I tell everyone, forget the polls, forget the pundits, keep your eye on the big picture as gauged by the keys. And as I've said, Biden is only down 2 keys right now, and all 4 shaky keys would have to fall against him to predict his defeat. That could happen, and that's why I haven't made a final prediction yet.
But American voters don't seem to be particularly happy with their choices. In fact, both Biden and Trump seem to be unpopular with voters. Has this ever happened before?
Absolutely. We saw that, for example, in the election of 1992, which pitted the incumbent president, George H.W. Bush, the Republican, against his Democratic challenger, Bill Clinton. And those two candidates were so unpopular that for the first and still only time in American history, a third party or independent candidate actually beat both of them in the polls. And that was Ross Perot. And in the spring of 1992, he was actually well ahead of both Bush and Clinton, showing how discontented voters were. That didn't hold, of course, when you got to the election, but it was an indicator.
But as far as Trump's ongoing trials are concerned, many of Donald Trump's fans say they believe he's being unfairly prosecuted, and echoing Trump himself, that his criminal trial would eventually boost his standing at the polls. Do you think Trump's legal troubles have had any effect on his popularity?
Well, not so far. But let me say this, I'm not a psychic with a crystal ball. I'm not like Speaker Mike Johnson, who thinks he has a pipeline to the Almighty. The keys are based on history. They're very robust because retrospectively they go all the way back to the horse and buggy days of politics, 1860, when Abraham Lincoln was elected, and forward, predictably, they go all the way back to 1984. But because they're based on history, it's possible that there could be such a cataclysmic, unprecedented event that could change or influence elections outside the context of the keys. And one such possibility is Trump's legal troubles. He is right now sitting on the dock in New York in a criminal trial, facing 34 felony counts of falsely reporting his hush money payments to the porn star Stormy Daniels, to illegally deceive the electorate and deceive the government. And if he's convicted of serious felonies, that could, outside the context of the keys, shake up the race. Remains to be seen whether he's convicted or not and what the effect would be.
Meanwhile, do you think student protests in the US will be one of the hurdles to Biden's re-election? Is it likely to materialize into political poison for him ahead of November?
Well, one of my keys is social unrest. And I indicated that was one of the shaky keys that could turn against Biden. It hasn't yet, because for social unrest to turn against the White House party, it has to be sustained, right, and it has to be of sufficient magnitude to threaten the stability of the country. Right now, we've seen, something like 48 and 50 college protests out of 6,000 college campuses. That's less than 1%. And we've seen less than 1% of the students participating. So it remains to be seen whether these protests will be sustained over time and whether they'll become significant enough to threaten the stability of the country. So keep your eye on that key.
Right, as we wrap, take us through Allan Lichtman's 13 keys to the White House.
As I said, my keys probe the strength and performance primarily of the White House party. Only one key has anything to do with the challenger, and it's a very high threshold keys. So my keys are the mandate key, based on the last midterm election, incumbency, contest for the incumbent party nomination, third party, whether there's no recession in the election year, the long-term growth record of the incumbent party, policy change, scandal, social unrest, foreign policy successes and failures. And then the last two keys are the only ones that have anything to do with the candidates. Key 12 is whether the incumbent party candidate is one of those once-in-a-generation, truly inspirational candidates, like Franklin Roosevelt on the Democratic side or Ronald Reagan on the Republican side. And Joe Biden's kind of a vanilla candidate, and thus he loses that key. The last key is the only one pertaining to the challenger, and it says the challenging candidate is not one of those once-in-a-generation inspirational candidates, and I rate that as true, because while Trump is a great showman, he only appeals to a narrow segment of the election. He's not broadly appealing, like Franklin Roosevelt, who won 4 landslide elections, or Ronald Reagan, who won 2 landslide elections. Donald Trump actually lost the popular vote by 10 million votes combined in his two presidential runs.
Well, Allan Lichtman, thank you so much for making time for us and joining us on The World 24/7 on the NDTV network.